Yes, hello. It's Jason. Welcome back to the Ultra Culture Podcast, episode 124. My guest today returning to the show is Angel Millar, the author and all-around awesome dude who is a consulting hypnotist and personal growth mentor. He is a really fascinating guy, really into magic, martial arts, meditation, self-hypnosis, all kinds of awesome stuff. We talked to him on the podcast before. You can always go check that one out. You can check out his latest book, The Path of the Warrior Mystic, Being a Man in an Age of Chaos, which I greatly enjoyed. All right, today we are continuing our new experimental format from before, where guests and I have been talking about books and movies in pop culture. So we talked to Mitch Horowitz about The Dark Knight and Batman. We talked to Mickey Pellerano about Dion Fortune's book, The Mystical Kabbalah. And today, we are talking to Angel Millar about Eyes Wide Shut, Stanley Kubrick's final movie from 1999. I'm guessing you've probably seen this, but just in case you haven't, maybe you're younger, or you haven't seen it in a while, here's the rundown on the movie from Wikipedia. Eyes Wide Shut is a 1999 erotic mystery psychological drama film directed, produced, and co-written by Stanley Kubrick. It is based on the 1926 novella Traumnovelle, aka Dream Story, by Arthur Schnitzler, transferring the story's setting from early 20th century Vienna to 1990s New York City. The plot centers on Bill Harford, played by Tom Cruise, a medical doctor who is shocked when his wife Alice, played by Nicole Kidman, reveals that she had contemplated having an affair a year earlier. He then embarks on a night-long adventure during which he infiltrates a masked orgy of an unnamed secret society. This movie is really important for a lot of reasons, not least of which is that it is a truly awesome and great hallmark in the history of cinema, but it also obviously has a lot of occult dimensions. It has a lot of aspects of it that relate to psychotherapy, shadow work, sexuality, not to mention masked orgies by secret societies, making it one of the all-time perennial favorites of people who are into the kind of stuff that listen to this show. As you might imagine, there is a tremendous amount to unpack in this movie, and I really enjoyed watching it for the first time in 23 years after originally seeing it in the theater. It was not the movie that I remember, and you're really going to enjoy my conversation with Angel. P.S. Our new mega course is out at magick.me and is tremendously successful already. It is called Mastering Meditation, and it is the greatest course on the planet. I say without any exaggeration. I know I made it, but it's true. It is the greatest course on the planet for learning and mastering the core fundamentals of true meditation, mindfulness, and yoga. Have you ever looked at stuff on meditation that is widely available, like apps or nice YouTubes with calming music, or I don't know, just kind of really silly meditation techniques that people talk about, or anything like that, and just thought, this is so lame. It's so boring. That's because it is. Meditation, when properly practiced, is nothing short of the path for humans to evolve to the next level. It is the best technique on the planet for overcoming ourselves, for becoming more than the animal that we are born as. And just like most things in life, paradoxically, what appears to be the most basic, the most prosaic, the most simple technique in world spirituality is actually the most intense, profound, and transformative when correctly practiced. Problem is, even though meditation as a true tradition has existed for thousands of years, and there's no shortage on the real of information on the real stuff, nobody in the West, quote unquote, ever really teaches the real stuff, either because they don't know it or because it's too hard. They don't want to commit to it. Well, no longer. Mastering Meditation gives you everything to fully jump into and master the path of Raja Yoga, Kingly Yoga, the greatest of all yogas meaning spiritual techniques. And instead of just telling you about meditation, this course is going to turn you into a meditator. It is a 2-month-long course, which is designed to imprint the pattern of meditation into your life, starting with 5 minutes a day and ending by week 8 at an hour a day. So it starts light and it can be integrated into even the most busy schedule. And you will come out of this course as a potent, serious, long-term, dedicated meditator. And that means that you will be using the same technique as all of the most successful people in world history. If you look at any of the people at the top of their game, and if you don't believe me, just go look at Wikipedia. If you look at people who are at the top of the financial world, the artistic world, the business world, the political world, look at all of them, and very likely, if you look close enough, they will have some type of meditation practice somewhere in there. I remember about 10 years ago reading a novel called Bangkok 8 by John Burdett. Excellent book, which is about a Buddhist cop in Thailand, which is an awesome premise. And I remember there's a conversation in that book where he asks a Buddhist monk, I believe, he's pointing up at all the skyscrapers in downtown Bangkok, and he's pointing up at the top and saying, all those people, all the tops of business, all of the people in charge, how many of them do you think got there by using meditation techniques? And the Buddhist monk says, all of them. And it's true. Look at people like Ray Dalio, look at people like Paul Tudor Jones, look at all these financial people. You will see. So what that really, really means is that could be you. That can be you. That will be you. Meditation is no different than physical exercise. It is just exercise for your mind. And what can't you do with an Arnold Schwarzenegger mind? Literally anything. It will improve every single area of your life, no matter what it is that you do. It will make you better. It will make you more present. It will make you more compassionate. It will make your relationships better. It will make sex better. It will make your finances and career better. It will make you more creative, happy, fulfilled. I mean, what else do you want? It's all waiting there for you on a platter. Mastering Meditation, magick.me, magick.me. Scroll down to our course list. You will see an animated logo of a woman meditating. That's the course. That's the one. Click it. Go. Get it done. You will thank me. All right. Here's our guest, Angel Millar. You're really, really going to love this. Okay, eyes wide shut.
Yeah.
Okay. What did you think? When was the last time you'd seen this movie before rewatching it? Because I think this was your suggestion, right, to do this one.
Yeah, I think I watched it a couple of years ago, and then I've seen it, going back a couple of decades. I've watched it a few times.
I had not seen it since I saw it in the theater, and I think I was 17 or 18 when I saw it in the theater.
Oh, really?
And it definitely, it definitely hits different as an adult. I don't think I really understood anything in it as a teenager.
Yeah. Yeah. But still, it's very visually impactful. So.
Absolutely. So I took 6,500 words of notes on this movie, but why don't I let you?
Did you? Okay.
And I think it's actually a very timely. This movie is timely again in a way. It was just rated the #1 movie of the 1990s by IndieWire 2 days ago.
Oh, really?
And
wow.
Yeah,
great.
So I saw that just looking it up, and it's timely in a lot of other ways. One is Tom Cruise's career has been resuscitated by Top Gun 2, which I don't know if you saw that,
right?
But pretty awesome.
I haven't seen.
I highly recommend it. It's great.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's great. Okay. So he's now persona grata again. People have accepted him back after his long jaunt through science, continuing jaunt through Scientology and being weird. So Tom Cruise is back on top again. He made at least $1 billion on that movie. And also there's the themes of masks, of secret societies, of all of the stuff that have been on people's minds in the pandemic, particularly Jeffrey Epstein, Klaus Schwab, all of that stuff. So this movie is very archetypal in that way. But why don't you just lead us off? What was it about this movie that brought you to suggest it to do a show about?
Yeah, so good question. Well, I think it does have this very strong element of a secret society, which many people associate with Freemasonry. I would say, but associate with Freemasonry or that kind of world of secret societies. Think of the Bavarian Illuminati of the 18th century, of this idea of some kind of elite getting together in some very glamorous setting or mansion somewhere behind, protected by passwords and secrets and fake guises and this kind of thing. So I thought that was interesting, and just this kind of idea that there is something, and maybe putting a more positive spin on it, that the everyday world is something else going on underneath it, that there's something more mysterious, maybe something more perverse, but something more maybe deeper and a lot more colorful going on as well.
Excellent. This is, in a way, the archetypal occult movie. It's like whenever people think about secret societies or the Illuminati, they inevitably think about the masked ball scene and the soundtrack accompanying it. And this was a very actually archetypal year for kind of Gnostic and occult cinema. 1999, I remember very vividly. It's almost like every single movie that came out had an occult or Gnostic aspect to it, or was about reality not being what it seems, or something else going on under the hood. And maybe that had something to do with premillennial tension, or maybe they were just paying screenwriters more at the time. I don't know. But, Matrix, Fight Club, Truman Show, there was even bits of that in Magnolia or The 13th Floor, Blair Witch Project, Sixth Sense. It was a banner year for what is reality movies. And this is definitely one of them. But I will say, rewatching it, on one hand, I picked up on, there's actually quite a lot of occult symbolism in this movie, real symbolism. And on the other hand, it was not occult at all to me anymore. And it is very much a movie about marriage. And ultimately, in rewatching it, I felt this is, in a way, such a romantic movie. It's a movie, it's like a love story for adults. It's about two adults in a marriage accepting each other's dark sides and understanding that they're stuck together.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So what was your take on it rewatching it?
Yeah, my take on it a bit like a lot less occult than people imagine, and that it really is more of a sort of love story than anything else, or you could say it's about the intricacies of being faithful in a long-term relationship, as opposed to the allure of sex. And I think, pushing that analogy a little further, you could say it's also about the veneer of morality, the veneer of monotheism, and I would include contemporary politics in that as well, with this sort of pagan right beneath the surface that keeps wanting to sort of rise up through dreams or through secret societies or through fantasy. And so I think in a way you can see it as the pagan versus the Christian, or the monotheistic, or the moralistic, for sure.
Yeah, that is definitely what my viewing it was. I mean, for me, the central symbol of this movie is masks, right? And which is particularly funny given the current state of things. But it's about the masks that people wear in society, and how, in a sense, that essentially makes society possible. That it cannot be. That it is an illusion, and that it's not an illusion to be stripped away, but one to be upheld. I'll come back. We can come back to that later. But why don't we, just to get it out of the way, I wanted to maybe start off by just directly addressing kind of the occult stuff and occult symbolism in this movie.
So
that we can get onto, in my mind, the actually much, much more interesting side of things, which is what you just said, the intricacies of long-term relationships and marriage and fidelity and all of the I think it's interesting that this was Stanley Kubrick's last movie, because that really is the final frontier in terms of like things for artists to grapple with. And that's something that haunts everyone, I think.
Yeah.
So you may have picked up on stuff I didn't pick up on, but the most obvious thing going into this movie is the repetition of the Star of Ishtar.
Right. When they go to the party in Ziegler's house, yeah, that's right. And there's this sort of sort of like a large Christmas ornament of the Star of Ishtar. That's right. Yeah, and I guess it's open to debate whether Stanley Kubrick really knew that it was the Star of it. But certainly it's replacing the Christmas tree, and which would be pagan anyway, and Christmas ornamentation. And so even from that sense, you can see that there's some weird symbol that is replacing the sort of more normal symbolism that we would associate with Christmas. And, why is that? I mean, is it the Star of Ishtar? Is it some weird symbol that is associated with that secret society? Or is it a kind of wheel of the year? But if it is the Star of Ishtar, then it would immediately sort of bring back this sort of Babylonian pagan world of the goddess and fertility, but of sexuality and death, perhaps. It's definitely intriguing that this very large symbol is on the wall of this mansion where this party is going on, and also just this otherwise very sort of lack of decoration for a Christmas event, apart from those sort of white lights that are everywhere. It's very sparse, in fact.
Yeah, I think it's actually pretty straightforward. I think it repeats multiple. I can't remember where, but I think it repeats multiple times other than that one spot. But there's also, did you notice there is a Hebrew Daleth in the doctor's office?
Oh, in the painting?
Yes. Did you pick up on that?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly looks like a Hebrew letter. That's right. And the painting is the sort of figures in red robes, sort of in the distance, which seems to allude to the figure in a red robe in the mansion where who's sort of presiding over the sort of occult looking orgy. So yeah, that's intriguing as well. Definitely.
And of course, Daleth is the letter associated with Venus, which also Ishtar is associated with Venus. So at that point, I have to say that it's got to be intentional on whoever's part. And so, and I'm thinking about that. And there's also some other repeating Venus imagery. For instance, their daughter is named Helena, which could very well be a reference to Helen of Troy, who is, connected to Aphrodite in the Odyssey and Euripides. But I think that it's just actually that's a very surface level symbol, and that this movie basically is the descent of Ishtar, or the descent of Inanna, the Mesopotamian myth of going to the underworld. And Tom Cruise goes to the underworld in this movie, but it's not a mythological underworld; it's the underworld of repressed desires and of society. So it very much is the descent of Inanna. So I think that one might just be kind of a direct on the nose point that's being made there. And of course, the movie is set during Christmas also, which is the darkest part of the year. And so that is also a story about the going into the underworld and returning.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course that would also have been during the time of, or prior to Christmas in the pagan Roman era. That would have been the festival of Saturnalia, of course, when there was sort of a lot of orgies and debauchery and drinking going on as well. So slaves would be masters for a day, and masters would become the slave for a day, and this kind of thing. So this sort of very weird. Role reversal, lots of orgies and drunkenness, and it was just sort of debauched celebrations for about 3 weeks.
I didn't realize it was that long. That's quite a party.
I think originally it wasn't that long, but I think by the end of the pagan Rome, it extended to about 3 weeks.
That's great.
They managed to extend that.
So I'm guessing we probably can trace a line from that to like Carnivale, and the medieval festivals,
for sure.
and I think which are shown in the masks in the movie, which I think is the fact that it's European and nobility is a point I want to return to, because I think there's something important there. But there's something about that's really interesting. The Saturnalia and Carnivale is obviously the time where people are allowed to take the mask. They put a mask on in order to take the mask off.
Yeah, that's right.
And let go of the expectations of society, and with the understanding that they're going to return to upholding them, but that everyone mutually agrees that there's there's tension there, that everyone is not necessarily completely happy doing it, but that they have a pressure release and they're going to return to it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think there's an interesting parallel with the series Stranger Things. I don't know if you've seen that.
I actually haven't.
It's based on it's sort of influenced by H.P. Lovecraft's writing. It's really a kids series, but it's pretty interesting. But to cut it short, they show that underneath, sort of beneath the ordinary world, there's this other world that's being created by this sort of demonic monster replica of the world that we live in, but it's sort of derelict and grey and sort of there's fungus all over it, and it's inhabited by these monsters. And I noticed that none of the monsters have faces. And I think this is probably a reflection of our fears about the internet, that there's these faceless people that are slowly consuming our world and turning our world into this sort of derelict replica of the real thing. So you think of, the sort of there's 3D worlds that you can live in now, and then of course the faceless characters being those who attack people on social media and whatnot. But yeah, so there's a sort of strange connection to that. But this idea that you wear a mask and it allows you to express, in the case of Eyes Wide Shut, to express some kind of repressed part of you, the sort of animal nature that you want to have sex with attractive women or attractive people with attractive bodies, and then it's in a sense all your pretensions to be a noble person who doesn't judge by appearances can be thrown out the window. And of course this was written by Arthur Schnitzler, who was a neuroscientist, and I believe that Freud actually said he was nervous about meeting Schnitzler because he regarded him as his doppelganger, because they were both interested in the mind and this idea of repressions and sexual repressions.
So this would have been the 1920s novel that the book was based on, which is set in Vienna instead of New York.
That's right. And they kind of pay a brief sort of homage to that, I notice, in the movie, when Dr. Bill, the main character, goes to Ziegler's mansion in Manhattan, and he's called to resuscitate a prostitute or sex worker who's overdosed on drugs. If you look behind her, there's actually a painting which is painted in the style of Gustav Klimt, who was around, in the Viennese circle at the same time as Freud. So they seem to be trying to pay a homage to that and noticing that, which is kind of curious.
Interesting. Yeah. Why don't we, actually, for those who have not seen the movie or not seen it recently, well, first of all, definitely spoiler alerts, because I want to cover the entire movie. But let's just kind of go through the movie from the beginning. So this is kind of the opening of the movie. So the setup is we have Tom Cruise is a kind of socialite, upper middle class doctor. His wife is Nicole Kidman. They were very famously an actual couple at the time. And in the movie, they go to a party it's like a Christmas party. And I forget why he's there in the first place. Right, it's a Christmas party thrown by a kind of wealthy acquaintance.
Yeah, it's he's the doctor of Ziegler, the guy who's throwing the party and being invited. Although, of course, he's ultimately a little bit out of his depth in terms of the money he's making, because these are all meant to be multi-millionaires. He's probably not quite at that. So.
Yeah, and I think that right there was central to that. Right there is really key, because watching this movie, I think there's a lot there about class. I think there's as much there about class and society as there is about sex and marriage. And of course, they're interconnected. So they're there. It's a Christmas party. There are people much richer than them. And okay, so this guy, he's this guy's doctor. Okay, great. And then his patient is upstairs partying with a prostitute who then overdoses on heroin, and he's called upstairs to help. While this is happening, Nicole Kidman is dancing with a wealthy, older Eastern European gentleman who's doing his best to seduce her. So there's a couple things that go on in this kind of kicks off the movie. There's a couple things I noticed that go on here. One is their marriage is, so I think at some point they state that they've been married for 9 years and they have a 7-year-old daughter, and their marriage is about to be tested here. And so in the beginning of the movie, it's interesting. You see the contrast between you're kind of shown each of their sexual fantasies outside of the marriage. And for Tom Cruise, who's a man, it's 2 younger women. And for Nicole Kidman, it's an older man, which I thought was pretty funny, actually.
Yeah.
And then Tom Cruise is called upstairs. And I think that right there is kind of like, being called up to be with the upper class. There's just an obvious class symbol there. And perhaps the wheels begin to turn in his mind of, okay, maybe I can climb the social ranks here. But of course he's not. This is an illusion. And I think this is a really key part of the rest of the movie, is the kind of class aspiration there. And doctors specifically really symbolize kind of like the class aspiration of the upper middle class, in that, middle class people are told, become a doctor or a lawyer. And the idea is that if you're a doctor, you can, climb up the social ladder. But of course, you mentioned him being out of his depth. I think one thing that is infamous about doctors also is they very often go into extreme debt to try to appear more wealthy than they actually are.
Right? Yeah, interesting.
For the rest of the movie, there's a bit of Tom Cruise, I think, they're both in a sense struggling with the balance, not just of their marriage, but of their class position as well. And that is first, called into play in this. So much of this movie is about public performance. So there's that. And then, but both of them are kind of tested there a little bit, but Tom Cruise has an opportunity with these 2 young models, which he doesn't actually go for. He behaves himself with a lot of decorum when he's upstairs. Nicole Kidman also just about, but does not give in to temptation. But then when they're back, the inciting incident of the movie occurs, which is Nicole Kidman, they're both getting stoned, and Nicole Kidman reveals this whole sexual fantasy that she's had about a prior year where she had met a young naval officer.
It's sort of intriguing, right? And in a way, I think there's an element of comedy. I don't know if it's intentional or not, because it seems throughout the entire movie, Dr. Bill is almost having sex, and he has all these encounters where he's just about to have sex with a beautiful woman, and something happens. So he winds up with a prostitute one night. I think he's just about to pay her and have sex with her, and then the phone rings, and it's his wife Alice, who wants him to go back, obviously. And in a way, I think that's almost like a dream, right? You have these sexual dreams, but I think rarely in sexual dreams do you ever have the sex. You kind of just lead up to it, and you're just about to have the sex, and you wake up. So in a sense, it's very much like the title of the original novel, Dream Story. But it's all, in a way, I think there's also an element of, I don't know if it's intentional, but an element of comedy that you can never quite seal the deal. Or maybe he's just meant to be too much at the end of the day to do it, because there is this sort of element of morality when he goes to the Rainbow fashion store to get an outfit to go to the orgy. There's the daughter of the owner, who's probably around 13 or something like that, maybe 14. having sex with these two older Asian men. He's pretty horrified by this, and horrified later on when the owner is clearly pimping her out. He doesn't like that. So there is some morality, and even when he leaves the prostitute, although he doesn't have sex with her, he still pays her as if he did. So I think a lot of things are going on. I think that's not often commented on is that although his wife Alice, talks about this sexual fantasy she had the previous summer, which I'm guessing must be not the one just gone, but the one before that, so 18 months ago, and she clearly thinks that this is pretty outrageous and very risque, that she had a sexual fantasy about some guy she saw, but. In a way, I think that just goes to emphasize the difference between men and women, because I just couldn't imagine that a man would say, well, do you remember 18 months ago?
Yeah.
I had a sexual fantasy about, it would be, do you remember like last week? Be that long ago.
Right, and then 10 minutes ago.
And he is, and in the space of 24 hours, he's constantly pursuing having sex with different women, even if it never quite happens. His sexual appetite seems to be a lot more voracious than hers, although she clearly thinks that she's at least as sexual as him, or maybe more than that. But I think the timeline suggests that that's not really true. And she's at the end of the movie, she has this dream about an orgy, and he's just come back from one, of course, and she's completely disturbed by it and finds it just repulsive, whereas he doesn't seem to necessarily be, sexually aroused by it. He doesn't seem to be disturbed by it either. So.
That's. I think that this is a very intensely moral movie in a way, and it's a movie about upholding the institution of marriage. And it is interesting that although it is theoretically a movie about infidelity and a couple struggling with infidelity, no infidelity actually ever occurs or ever occurred. Neither one of them has sex with anyone else. It's just a series of fantasies or close calls. And I was reading that originally this actually, Stanley Kubrick did want to film this as a comedy starring Woody Allen. So there may be something to that as well. Mm. But this scene is obviously the pivotal scene that kicks off the rest of the movie. And there's a key line there where perhaps it is the question, one of the core questions of the movie, where Nicole Kidman looks at Tom Cruise and says, "What makes you an exception? Like, how are you different from any other man?" And of course, the true answer is he's not, right? But he thinks he is, and he's saying, "I would never do anything," and all of that. And she says, "What makes you an exception?" And maybe he has to spend the rest of that movie testing those boundaries in a way. But my question for this scene, and I think it's one of the core questions of the whole movie, critically watching it, is, does Nicole Kidman, in a sense, create the plot? It's obviously a movie about initiation. Tom Cruise has to go on this underworld initiatory journey, but is she kind of setting, I mean, she obviously very intentionally reveals this fantasy, and my initial reaction is, she's trying to goad him into infidelity in order to justify that she wants to sleep with this older Hungarian man. But that guy never shows up again in the movie, and I don't think that necessarily was what was going on. So the question is she inciting this to get him to recognize something or to initiate him in some way?
Yeah, so I don't know if she's intentionally pushing him to do something. I mean, maybe it's the kind of spiteful comment that someone might make in a relationship, but nevertheless, whether it's meant to be spiteful or whether it's meant to push someone, a comment like that probably is going to push someone to do something at some point, whether that night or in the few doubts about your relationship and about yourself. So in that sense, she is some like initiating, maybe some kind of mother figure who's pushing him into the world, maybe not of men exactly, but into this underworld.
Yeah, and she goes on her own underworld journey as well. But she really she really digs in the twist the thumb screws in this scene. I wrote down some of the quotes. She says, that she kept thinking about this fantasy. And she talks about later on that she and Tom Cruise are talking about their daughter. And she says, we talked about the future. We made plans. And at no time was he ever out of my mind. And and then further on, she says, you, the kids, I would have given it all up for one night. I would have given up my entire future, everything for one night. But at the same time, you were more dear to me than ever. And my love was both tender and sad. And she talks about being asleep and then dreaming, and then she wakes up afraid, and she doesn't know if she's afraid that Tom Cruise had left her or if he might still be there. And that right there is kind of like the painful crux of the long-term relationship, perhaps,
Yeah, and it does seem from that through the sort of veneer of normal society and of monotheism and of us wanting to think of ourselves as moral people, that there is this sort of pagan yearning just to abandon everything and experience something more ecstatic, obviously in this case through sexuality or sex.
Right. And I think this is one of the points that's being made here is, human beings are inherently pagan. They do just want to follow their impulses, but there is a mutual understanding that they can't.
That's right.
Because otherwise there's no civilization. And so much of this plays into the class stuff in the movie as well, but so much, I think, of what is being said here is, marriage itself is a mask in the case of the middle class.
Right.
It is, it's part of their aspiration. And I think to demonstrate that, have you seen the movie The Departed? The Scorsese movie?
No, I haven't actually.
It's a Scorsese movie about the Irish mafia from the mid-2000s. It was really good. But there's this quote in it, Matt Damon in this movie, that really demonstrates this principle of marriage being, essentially, it's an institution and it's something that people engage in order, as part of their economic drive, as part of their need to fit in and ascend the ranks of society. And so in this movie, Matt Damon plays it's a remake of the Chinese film Infernal Affairs. But in the movie, Matt Damon plays a spy who is from the Irish mafia, who's placed with the police special investigations unit. And Alec Baldwin is his presiding officer. And Alec Baldwin, they're golfing, and Alec Baldwin says to Matt Damon, and forgive the language, I'm quoting a Martin Scorsese movie. He says, marriage is an important part of getting ahead. It lets people know you're not a homo. A married guy seems more stable. People see the ring. They think, at least somebody can stand the son of a bitch. Ladies see the ring. They know immediately you must have some cash or your cock must work. And it's like that right there kind of says it all. It's like, marriage is not about love. It is in theory about children, but ultimately it's a mask that is worn for the benefit of society.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that mask, that tension is tested in this movie. And like you're saying with the pagan, it's like clearly everyone wants to be free of that. But one of the other core points this movie makes, I think, is that this is a uniquely middle class restriction, because the middle class must, or the upper middle class in Tom Cruise's case, must, the whole idea of respectability is a middle class construction. And throughout this movie, there are many scenes where, in addition to trying to escape the tension of his marriage, Tom Cruise tries to escape the tension of his class position, where, there's lots of scenes where he's going to prostitutes or primarily, but he can't, the lower classes are seen as a comfort to him to escape to. And he tries to get into the upper class, but that doesn't work. But it's also shown that the lower class does not have any of this need to wear masks around sexuality. That's kind of like a great trope of literature. There are scenes of people having sex in the street, after Christmas parties, and there's prostitutes and things like that. But also the upper classes don't, because they can create this elaborate charade where they're putting on masks and allowing themselves this pressure release in this kind of elite secret society. So it's only him that's bound by sexuality. Everyone else is either not concerned with putting on the mask or is powerful enough to take it off. But he's not.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think there's something else that's curious as well that might be related to this, and that is you all look around his apartment, there's lots of paintings, and even in his doctor's office, there's lots of original artwork as well. And it's actually his wife that was an art dealer, and it's almost as if maybe his marriage has taken over his personality, or his wife started to give him his personality. That we don't really see much of Dr. Bill in even in his doctor's office. It's all presumably her artwork.
That's really interesting. I did not pick up on that.
Sold.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's also interesting because art dealer is very much a job of serving and selling to the rich.
Yeah, that's right. Very much so. Yeah, definitely.
With it comes, I think, probably with its own class aspirations attached to it. But you read it as that he had lost his own personality as well in the marriage.
I think so. I mean, I didn't get a great feeling of him being interested in this art, but it is all over his office and all over his apartment as well. And it seems to be that, that her personality is creeping into every area of his life, which is maybe another reason why he needs to go and seek sex everywhere else as well. Although, it should be said that, of course, nearly all of the women in the movie have the same color hair and same kind of coloring as Nicole Kidman.
I didn't notice that either.
Can't really escape his wife. Yeah, pretty much all of them. Mandy, the prostitute, does. I think Domino, who he tries to hook up with later, the girl in the costume place, she has pretty much the same coloring. And then Mandy, of course, appears later on and rescues him from the orgy, where there's some kind of implicit threat to his life. So yeah, it's almost like he keeps going after the same woman. It's like his wife is sort of haunting him in some way, or maybe he wants to do more sexual things than she will do, but keeps going after the same kind of woman, or is haunted by the same sort of figure.
That's really interesting. And then, by the end of the movie, he, of course, just has to accept his place in the world. But that's interesting. And I think that is something very core to masculinity also, and at least in this type of context where, and I think it's core to kind of left-handed initiation and conceptions of the world as well, where there's kind of an understanding that, and I think the end of the movie really underlines this, is that to a large extent, men's dark side is their true self. Their hidden self is the true self. The mask is not. But of course, they have to wear the mask and play the role of nice family man and responsible and all of that. But of course, yearn to be themselves. To let that tension down, and often that is pursued outside the marriage, because there's also, I think, an understanding with marriage or long-term relationships that you might be a werewolf, as I think all men are, but you can't bring the wolf into the house, right? But you also can't repress the wolf forever, because it's not possible.
Yeah.
So what do you do? And it's like in the movie, the rich have their answer. They have this whole elaborate, bizarre secret society thing where they're allowed to let it all out. But what is Tom Cruise gonna do? And he's struggling with this in this movie.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that reminds me a little bit of the Moon card, where you have those two towers, but you have the dog and the wolf. And the dog is really just a domesticated wolf. And presumably beneath the moon, there's always this risk that the domesticated dog is going to turn into a wolf again. And people tarot readers generally say that that's a card of intuition, which is intuition is really about things like mastering a master musician, but it's more really a card about instinct. What are you going to turn into, and on the full moon, or when no one's looking and it's dark, and and your inner, your wild nature is calling you again.
Absolutely. And it's interesting also that even while he's kind of in this process of kind of going wild a little bit, which is only for one night, basically. It all takes place within 24 hours. So it's pretty vanilla at the end of the day. Nothing that shocking goes on. But he's also, it's interesting, he in some of his conversations with other people, he's doing his best to also uphold not just his public face, but the institution of marriage. There's a part where he interacts with a patient who has just lost her father, but also has just gotten married, and he's saying, "Oh, congratulations, that's wonderful." And there's just this look of dread on her face because she obviously does not want to be married. But he's just kind of like, "No, you have to uphold. Just suck it up. You have to uphold the illusion." And then she tries to have sex with him, and he refuses and says, "No, like you have to." And then interestingly enough, this woman's husband comes in and looks very much like Tom Cruise.
Right.
But perhaps one who is not, maybe Tom Cruise, who a version that has not faced his own dark side, because he seems pretty like, pretty milquetoast and kind of beat down and domesticated.
He's very smart and has nicely combed hair for sure. So there's probably not much of a wild man that comes through him, I would think.
Yeah. But yet, so Tom Cruise is, looking for love in all the wrong places, as they say. But I think there's some scenes in this also where, if you remember, he's on the street and a gang of frat boys passes by and is kind of making fun of him. And his response to that is, obviously to be upset. But I read it also as he's looking at them, and it seems like he's upset that they're attacking him. But it seems like the look in his face is more like, I wish I was still like that. Yeah, I wish I was still a frat boy, and I did not have all these social chains on me. And in the original book, apparently, there's a whole lot of other stuff going there. The main character is Jewish in the original book, and a lot of the book is about that scene is meant to symbolize the anxiety of Jews in Austria at that period and being antagonized by society. Yeah. But in this case, it seems more like he's yearning for his college days, perhaps.
Yeah, that's an interesting scene, and some people have read it that it's really Stanley Kubrick poking fun at Tom Cruise, who has had all these gay rumors circulating around for years. So there's never been any proof of that. But and also there's we'll get back to the rainbow in a minute, but the rainbow obviously associated with gay pride, etc. But in a way, I think you could read it in totally the opposite way. There's one interesting thing when they're a group of hoodlums. It's very faint, but the main guy who's talking very loudly and showing off about his sexual prowess. He talks about a stripper that was giving him a lap dance with a red rose in her mouth. And there seems to be a lot of symbolism of red everywhere, especially in Tom Cruise's apartment. There's red curtains, red shows up. Yeah, so there was a lot of symbolism of red in the movie. So even in Tom Cruise's apartment, they have red curtains, or in the painting behind, and there's a lot of red in that apartment. But and then in the bathroom where he's sort of trying to resuscitate the prostitute, the painting behind her is all red as well. But Tom Cruise, Dr. Bill's apartment there's a lot. You go to Ziegler's apartment, it's actually virtually all white, apart from that painting. And then, of course, in the mansion where the sort of occultish orgy is taking place, there's that sort of high priest figure who's wearing a red robe again, like a sort of satanic priest. So, I don't think it's a coincidence that when these hoodlums appear, that the main hoodlum is talking about a stripper with a red rose in her mouth. Is it maybe symbolizing the sort of sexual that comes through through our repression of sexuality? It arises anyway. It's sort of in our furnishings and in the painting behind us, in the mouth. In a way, these hoodlums, of course, they see Tom Cruise or Dr. Bill and immediately start making fun of him, calling him a homosexual, and bending over and imitating gay sex or whatever. And in a way, I think you could see them as actually being sexually repressed. Like, why do they care about some guy on the street and they have to immediately start imitating gay sex and talking about it? And why is this guy talking about sort of trying to boast of his sexual prowess because a stripper gave him a lap dance, as if that's some big deal? It's almost as if they're ceasing in this quite weird way. I think the sexual repression seems to come through in different areas, whereas Dr. Bill is trying his utmost to indulge his sexual desire at that moment. So.
Interesting. Yeah, I actually did not pick up on that. Well, with the red, there's the so you took red as just a symbol of sexuality, just blatantly.
Yeah, I think so. With the high priest in the orgy wearing this red robe, and then this sort of weird sort of red backdrop in the thing that the furnishings aren't something you really look at, but that are always there. You just I don't know if there's an expression in America, but in England, becoming part of the furniture just means that you've been accepted into someone's house and you become almost like a non-entity. And it strikes me as a bit like that there's some meaning there, but it's not something they're looking at anymore. It's just sort of there in the unconscious.
Interesting.
Yeah, and if you look at the painting in the bathroom, it has a naked woman on it on this sort of red rug with some sort of floral like the furnishings from a distance in Dr. Bill's apartment. Actually, there's some kind of stylistic similarity.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting you point out the homophobic taunts of and connecting it with Stanley Kubrick possibly taunting Tom Cruise, because there's that scene near the end of the movie where Alan Cumming shows up as he's running the hotel, and it's just this unbelievably erotically charged scene that doesn't really seem to be in there for any reason. And it's an amazing performance, but Tom Cruise is just looks extremely uncomfortable in that scene. And it definitely, on one hand, it really, this is an unbelievably white and straight movie. And I think the first time a black person even shows up is, I believe, the attendant in the infirmary. And everyone at the orgy is white. And so, and women largely, possibly outside of Nicole Kidman and his daughter, largely exist either as prostitutes or, to say, to facilitate Tom Cruise's story in the case of Mandy, who trades herself for him. And so it's kind of like anyone who is not straight or white in this movie is not part of the main drama. They're just so on the periphery that they're no longer even involved in the story almost. Right. And that scene kind of pointed that out, where it could be read as, it actually, I think, could be read as another one of Tom Cruise's boundary tests or sexual adventures, in the sense that you can tell, and there is something about heterosexual men also, where they have to, like the frat boys, or like that quote from The Departed, demonstrate that they're not gay. Yet at the same time, they really need the affirming gaze of gay men. Like, they need to still feel like, well, at least, I'm desirable. If they were rejected by gay men as undesirable, they would probably go apeshit, right? It's like they need to feel desired in order to validate themselves, and with the same with women, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny. Yeah, you mentioned that. I was in I don't know if it was technically a drag club. I think it was years and probably about 20 years ago. And some friends had invited me. It was a birthday party of mine. We went along as a group, and yeah, what we couldn't help but notice was it was these sort of like jocks from sort of like the hoodlums in the street scene in Eyes Wide Shut. It was these sort of more sort of jock hoodlum type guys who were really, really like a little bit too into these drag queens, and weirdly, those were the guys that the drag queens were really gravitating towards. It wasn't us at all. It was just the exact opposite of the people you would think. You think they might be, gravitating to sort of artistic people, but no, it was these sort of New Jersey suburbanites.
What did you make of that?
That they weren't going there just for the jokes that the drag queens were dishing out. There was some sort of weird sexual tension between these really, not muscular guys, but sort of like jock-like, ordinary suburban New Jersey guys, that probably are a bit homophobic at the same time. I did find that really weird and maybe insightful. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. But that also shows, I mean, like a lot of the masks that people wear in society are just that.
Yeah.
It's all performed. And I think that, interestingly, and now I want to talk about the orgy scene also, there is homosexuality happening in the orgy, both between women performatively, but there's also a male couple dancing at one point. That's shown. It's kind of, it's like, well, they have their masks on now, so perhaps they can indulge in their true selves in that sense, in a way. But let's talk about the orgy, because this is obviously the scene that everyone remembers. It is now the most politically loaded scene. We are living, post Jeffrey Epstein. And it's kind of like, on one hand, this is obviously metaphorical. It's a dream sequence. There's tons of metaphorical significance to it. But parties like this, of course, do actually happen. And there's I don't know if you've seen this, there's a Vice News segment where they have anonymous interviews with people who work at high-priced hotels, talking about all the insane things and parties that happen with rich people, and what all the messes they've had to clean up. And it's just like stuff like this, right? It also made me think that whenever you have a scene like this in a movie, it's always from the perspective of the voyeur. You never get it from the perspective of the facilitator or the person who has to clean up afterwards.
Yeah, well, I think that is the one thing about the scene. Say what you like about it. At least the opening is very beautifully shot, and obviously these people have a great sense of aesthetics. From the little bit I've heard about such scenes, they tend to be a lot more tawdry and a lot less aesthetically beautiful.
Yeah, I think we both know that. It's basically like, if are there secret societies? Yeah, but they're way lower budget and there's way fewer girls.
Yeah. It's interesting. It should probably be said that, when he arrives, he has to give a password, which is what obviously, what makes people link it to Freemasonry or the Illuminati or something like that in the minds of the general populace, that you're entering the secret society and you have a password. And the password is, significant to the plot. It's Fidelio, a Beethoven opera. And I don't know if you know the plot of that.
I looked it up.
It's about a woman. Yeah, me too. It's about a woman who rescues her husband from a dungeon, which seems to directly relate to rescuing Dr. Bill or Tom Cruise from the orgy when there seems to be some threat against his life. But getting back to the beginning prior to the orgy, as he enters into this mansion somewhere upstate New York, there's this very elaborate ritual of women unrobing to this very sort of atmospheric, occultish music, with this sort of high priest figure in a red robe and a mask, and all of the other participants are masked, of course, and going through this very well rehearsed ritual, being, and then going calmly off with some figure in the audience, which is kind of interesting and maybe beautiful to a certain extent, and obviously disturbing in another way. And then after that, there's just lots of scenes of orgies and sex and nudity, etc. And Dr. Bill is taking a tour of all this, sort of taking it all in.
Yeah, and it is interesting that the password is Fidelio also, because I think the English translation of the German of the full title of the opera is Lenore, or the Triumph of Marital Love.
That's right. Yeah.
And in the plot, the man's wife who rescues him has to disguise herself, and it's to also go into a descent into the underworld, like Inanna.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So a couple really key things happen in this scene, and I may or may not have interpreted this correctly, because I'd had a few drinks by this time when I was watching the movie. But there's a part where, there's a few things to talk about here. One is he can't get in without a mask, which is pretty hilarious given the state of our world right now. And yes. And also, there's a part when he goes in where there's two figures on the balcony spot him and turn and look at him, and it's kind of suggested by the plot that there's a man and a woman. I think it's kind of suggested by the plot later that was Sidney Pollack. That was his patient from earlier in the movie, but that's never confirmed. But the way that I read it, on rewatching it, is it's a man and a woman specifically who both turn and look at him, and they're clearly older. And so I read it as a parental thing, and that this is an initiation. It's like he's seeing, like you said, he's seeing through the illusion, in a way, of society, and it's like his parents are saying, yes, it is all a lie. Everything is a lie. Well, now because so much of this movie is, I think the message is, true initiation into adulthood is accepting that. And you kind of get that with the scenes with the daughter, where Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman are projecting that after all of this has been through, they're still putting on a good face for the daughter and pretending everything is normal and fine for the daughter. So it's like the illusion is projected for the sake of children. And then it made me think, as children become older, as they become teenagers, young adults, they begin to realize that it's an illusion, and they get really angry, and they start peeling away and seeing things for being illusion, and questing for the truth, and all of the things that young people do. But ultimately, to become an adult is not only to accept the illusion, but to accept your part in maintaining it. It's essentially to become a co-conspirator. It's like you also become part of the conspiracy of adults maintaining the illusion, understanding that it's done for the benefit of children, of society. And it's like, the illusion must be maintained. And so I saw this as like a primal scene of Tom Cruise witnessing kind of like the truth that, this idea of true love and all of this is just, it's a made up fiction for the middle class, and that people actually are werewolves behind the scenes, and his parents are there, and they're saying like, yes, yes, welcome, deal with it. You're an adult now. We also are part of this conspiracy.
Yeah, it could be entirely right in that interpretation, because that is certainly present at the end of the movie, as you say, when he's walking through the toy shop with Nicole Kidman and his daughter, and they're trying to behave like nothing has happened, or nothing really. Well, I guess something has happened. He went to an orgy, but nothing. He didn't engage in anything. So.
Right. Once again, he's out of luck. But did you see True Detective? the TV show?
No, I don't think so.
Highly recommended. The first season is great.
Okay.
There's just a part, you don't need the context for it, but there's a part where Matthew McConaughey does this great career-defining role as a, extremely dark police officer, and he says to one of the female characters, who is his police partner, is divorcing his wife, or his wife is divorcing his partner. And Matthew McConaughey says to her, basically think of the children, not in those words, but he says, like, it's, he basically tells her, just like, uphold the illusion. What is this for if not for children? There's nothing except for children. That's what all of this is for.
Right.
Like, you just deal with living in the lie. It's because it's not about you. Marriage is not about the happiness of the people in the marriage. It's in and this movie makes that point too, that marriage is for everyone but the two people involved in it. It's performed for society. It's for children. It's to maintain appearances. It is to facilitate capital. And this is not, movie is also not critiquing that. It's upholding it in the end. Because one thing that I noticed is never in this entire movie does anyone mention divorce or splitting up once.
Right, that's right. Yeah, not at all.
Which would probably be different now. It would be kind of like, well, he's a toxic sociopath. You have to leave him, and some type of Instagram type thing. But
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But there's this understanding that the bond is eternal.
Yeah, and I don't think there is even any divorced people in the movie, right? Because even Nick Nightingale, the pianist, is married, although his family lives in another state, so he could quite easily just divorce or be playing around, but he doesn't seem to be doing either as well. So, and why make him married? Why shouldn't he just be a single guy?
Right, and that's so interesting, and of course this is based on a book from the 1920s, but the conception of society changed so much after the 1960s, where the idea became, one's bliss is paramount above all. Like, the happiness of the individual is more important than marriage. It is more important even than children, and that's perhaps. It's a totally different conception than I think prior to the 1960s. In many cases, divorce was illegal, and I don't know about the UK, but it was in a lot of places in the US. So there was a sense that if you're married, you're married, and if there's problems, drink about it.
Yeah. And, one thing that should be said about that, of course, or should be remembered, is that there wasn't female contraception until the late 1960s. And, people look back today and say, well, why did people get married young? Why did they stay married? Or why weren't they having sex all over the place? Well, it's a really simple answer. The women were going to get pregnant. So that's why you didn't have multiple sexual partners. And that's why you got married. Because if you had sex and you were a woman, you were going to get pregnant and have a child. And that's just the end of it. So that's, obviously from the time immemorial have insisted on people getting married and having families, so that you don't have, tribes full of children running around that nobody knows who they belong to, and men are hacking each other to pieces through jealousy as well. So
that, I think, let's talk about that, because that is not necessarily part of this movie, but definitely came to mind a lot while watching it, in that social attitudes have changed a lot even since, this movie came out 23 years ago, and things have changed a lot even since then. And I think that particularly now, people are perhaps not even interested in maintaining the institution of marriage. I think there's a wide dissatisfaction with it, with both genders. There's an understanding that it's a financial liability, that it's more of a liability than an asset, and that's a true tragedy, and really undermines the basis of civilization in a sense, but maybe not. I don't, it's like we're kind of in this period of experimentation where people are willing to drop the illusion. And, you see people experimenting with things like polyamory to varying degrees of unsuccess and things like that. And so there is not there's not even the social pressure as much to be married. In fact, I mean, women often are celebrated for not getting married and instead pursuing careers.
Yeah, that's right. Definitely.
So,
I think, I mean, who knows what the future will hold, but and certainly many marriages have been miserable in the past. Maybe even the majority of marriages were miserable. And as you say, people stay together for the children and because it was impossible to do. That is far from an ideal situation, of course. But I think, today with this push, especially to make women into workers and consumers, by people who call themselves anti-capitalist, notably, this idea that your life should be work and consumption. This has certainly never satisfied anyone, as far as I can see. And many marriages might have been miserable, but 70% of Americans at least their jobs. Well, now 70% of women hate their jobs, and that's why we have to have so much consumption, because people want to feel that, well, I hated my entire week, but at least I can get drunk or I can buy something that I like and get temporary satisfaction from buying something. So, I don't think that these new ways are going to prove satisfactory, and certainly mental illnesses are massively on the rise and have been over the last few decades, or last couple of decades especially. But so it's difficult to know what to do really in terms of society as a whole. I mean, I don't think it arrived in the same way that it was, but endless fleeting relationships are also pretty miserable as well. So
I think profoundly miserable. All of those things are profoundly miserable. And I think people are starting to realize that. And a lot of this movie is just, suffused with the machinations of capital in a way. It's like there's all this class stuff is going on, but also women are all seen as for sale. And even the daughter of the costume salesman is shown that he's just prostituting her, and this is like shocking for Tom Cruise.
That's right.
And that's a pretty harsh scene, and I wasn't actually quite sure what to make of that scene. So I want to come back and get your thoughts on that as well. But
sure.
Yeah, I mean, the point of this movie, I think, is it almost could have been made in other than the obvious content. It could have been made in the 50s in the sense that this is such this is kind of like, it's such an adult message in the true sense. It's just that it's not about you. It's not about your happiness. Marriage is not supposed to make you happy. So people, of course, are willing to discard it if they're not happy and just go on to the next thing. But it's kind of like, well, that's the point. It's like but you seek pressure releases where you can, perhaps, but it's a sacrifice taken on for at least to maintain the illusion of the middle class. And perhaps actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's not a coincidence that the middle class is vanishing throughout the Western world. It's like, perhaps the fundamental nature of the middle class is upholding this play and this set of masks. And without that, it's like, well, what are people but, as you were pointing out, consumers? And then they don't have class interest anymore. They're just there to be subjects of capital.
Yeah, well, and the other, I mean, the disappearance of the shrinking of the middle class is definitely tied to the shrinking of marriage, because, when you think about it, single parent families typically are not middle class. They're usually forced into sort of working class or worse conditions. And that means the children of that relationship are going to get a very poor in comparative to what they would do if the if the mother and father stayed together, and are more likely to have a low-paying job or wind up in prison or with addiction, and so on. So in a sense, the marriage is an illusion or a veneer or something you do to maintain appearances and to prop up the middle class, but without it, you get this dwindling middle class, and then you get the extremely rich, and then the poor, and and people that perhaps could have risen up and growing up in poverty and growing up without proper education. So,
it's really
you mentioned. Yeah, definitely. You mentioned sacrifice. I think one of the interesting, or more interesting parts of the movie, of course, is when Mandy, the prostitute who is at that orgy, she sacrifices herself so that Tom Cruise or Dr. Bill can live and leave. And it's definitely true that the women are all portrayed as purchasable, and prostitutes or sex workers or individuals who can at the very least be some status. And at the same time, this it's almost a kind of Christ moment, right? That she's still going to sacrifice herself for him. But at the same time, she's sort of going to be degraded. Jesus was on the cross and humiliated, and this would appear to be what's going to happen to her, and maybe she even is being humiliated. But in this sort of degradation, she manages to be the one person that acts nobly in the entire scene, maybe even in the entire movie, almost. That she's going to sacrifice her life. Of course, this movie, the name of the opera, Fidelio, and the theme, suggests that there's some kind of link between the prostitute Mandy, who sacrifices herself, and Nicole Kidman, as if she's some sort of astral projection of Dr. Bill's wife. But in that degradation, she seems to rise up and become noble somehow. So
that scene is really interesting. I had a lot of thoughts about it. One is it's later revealed that she is an ex-beauty queen. And there's kind of an undercurrent there of, she's past a certain age and has now just become a subject of capital, just to be owned and degraded, and no longer valued. And it's quite an extremely dark message. But also, Tom Cruise never fully recognizes that sacrifice. I mean, like, he sees her dead in the morgue and is shocked that she's dead, but forgive me, but it is just this profound moment of male privilege where he's just like, well, of course she would sacrifice herself for me. I'm the protagonist. Like, of course I'm the protagonist. I'm the straight white male. I'm Tom Cruise, and that underlies his interactions with, for instance, Alan Cumming as well, where he just kind of expects people to, treat him as the center of the universe. But he never fully recognizes that or pays that off or does his own atonement for that. And then he has the later conversation with Sidney Pollack where it's just like, she's utterly inconsequential to the rich, where he's just saying, well, she was a junkie. Yeah. The cops showed up. The police were happy. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It's just completely inconsequential. And that also is extremely dark. But but he also, Sidney Pollack also in that scene says, and it's never fully explained, and I didn't know what to make of this, and I'm really curious what your thoughts were. He points out this was also a mask. This was also a performance. He said that was a charade as well, and that actually was not a true sacrifice, that was like put on as a part of the play. But he doesn't explain how or why, and that's never delved into further. What were your thoughts on that?
And it seems like, and obviously that, I mean, it's really the explanation he's been given is just to kind of satisfy him so that he'll stop looking into it, or whether it really is true. So we don't really know if she was murdered or not. But yeah, I mean, the one thing that would suggest that that might be true is that, it does seem to be rehearsed. And how many other times would there have been a situation where there would be this question and answer where she's rescuing someone? I mean, presumably that wouldn't have happened before, but even in this dialogue, it seems it makes clear to her that she knows what will happen in this circumstance if she persists in sacrificing herself for him. But how would she really know? Because I mean, how many other people have snuck in there before? Presumably none.
Yeah, and it's unclear why they know it's not only that they know he's not meant to be there, because presumably they would just kill him or kick him out, but they then make him the center of the entire thing.
Yeah.
And you're not sure why, or if somebody tipped them off. But then later on, I thought this was actually fairly interesting. It's revealed that the reason they knew he was a fake was that he showed up in a taxi. And so it's like his class signifiers give him away. It's like, well, you don't have a limo, so you don't belong here. It's like him walking in with the run. And
right.
I think particularly in England, right? It's like class is so much shown by small things like shoes or buttons or turn of phrase and that type of thing.
Especially. Yeah.
And he just, as much as definitely. Even with a mask, he could not pull off. He's clearly just not one of them.
That's right.
So he's rejected by the rich, but I think also, interestingly enough, he's rejected by the poor as well. There's a lot of scenes where he's trying to kind of escape into the shelter of, like, there's a scene where he's in a cafe with working class people, and that's shown as just completely benign and comforting. And he's going to prostitutes where he probably arguably feels the most comfortable in the movie. But then he goes back, and the prostitute that he almost slept with has been revealed to be HIV positive. So it's like, well, he can't, he's pushed out of he can't go there either. So he's stuck. He's stuck exactly where he started from. That kind of brings us further towards the end of the movie, where the message seems to be just know your place, accept that this is where you are in society, and that he has to reconcile to that.
Yeah. Well, at the very end, there is this weird dialogue between Dr. Bill and his wife, Alice. And he says, oh, the thing is, a dream is never just a dream. And she says, but the important thing is that we're awake now, and hopefully we will be for a long time. Clear whether these things really took place at all, or if it was just a dream, or if it was partly a dream and partly reality. So, and it seems like reality and the dream all mixed together in ways that can't really be separated. Yeah, even his jealousy is ultimately just a jealousy of a fantasy that she had, not of a real thing that happened. So,
right.
But it still made him have a real reaction to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's that moment where he finally returns home at the end, and the ominous piano is now playing in his house. So he's not been able to compartmentalize. I think there's also an interesting resonance here with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where the classic story is that Dr. Jekyll is the respectable doctor that transforms into the disrespectable Mr. Hyde. And this is essentially the nature of men, right? It's like not just a horror story. It's like this is like the nature of men that they have to navigate. And there are lots of scenes of Tom Cruise walking around New York, kind of like in a long coat with leather gloves on, and he looks very much like the classic depictions of Dr. Jekyll. But he comes back at the end here, and the mask. He had forgotten the mask. The mask is on his pillow, and the gig's up.
Yeah,
and I think it was not.
That's right.
I didn't read it really as much as her discovering that he'd been sneaking around. It was more the recognition that his his dark side is, his true self. It's like the mask had been slipped. The mask was in bed with his wife. And that was, I think, making the point that his whole, he's so easily can compartmentalize. He comes back prior, and it's, he immediately goes into family man, and his daughter runs out and says, "Hi, Daddy," and he returns to being the family man. But now it slips, and it's not just that it slips, but it's shown that that's the mask. His dark side is his true self, and that perhaps this is also true of Nicole Kidman. And there's like this moment of mutual recognition. It's like they begin the movie in denial of each other's dark side, and they end the movie accepting that each has this dark side and accepting it. And she says, "We're awake now and for a long time to come, forever." And she says, "Forever frightens me." But there's this recognition that they see each other as complete beings now, and they stay married, which is, I think, it's really a romantic story, and an important story, and a mature story.
Yeah. I mean, just to mention the rainbow symbolism, which has been linked to the idea that Kubrick was poking fun at Tom Cruise for being gay, which I don't think it is, because, in Ziegler's apartment, in his party, those two female models are trying to seduce him, and they say, don't you want to go where the rainbow ends?
Right.
And that doesn't say, so I don't think that, sure, it is true that the rainbow flag, for example, of the gay movement came from the Wizard of Oz. That's true, and the rainbow in the Wizard of Oz. But it's two women trying to seduce him. It's not two men, so that seems entirely heterosexual. And even in the rainbow fashions, the sexual object is that girl. It's not a boy or a man. But I think the idea that we all want to go to the end of the rainbow, where there's this crock of gold, or where everything is more colorful, or this other world that's more interesting, is kind of what haunts everybody, right? But in the end, you have to deal with reality as it is, and you can make it more colorful, but maybe you can only do that if you embrace your dark side.
Yeah, but I think now that you put it like that, I think there's perhaps an even darker message there, which is, yes, these two women say, don't you want to know where the rainbow goes? And of course he wants to, because it's these two beautiful women. And it's like, well, maybe just this one time. But then he ends up obviously at this costume store called, Rainbow Clothes or whatever it's called. So that's pretty on the nose. And where does the rainbow end? It's like teenage prostitution. It's like if he follows his despicable, his own desires, he's going to end up not just Mr. Hyde, but there's a reason why certain standards have to be upheld in society. It's like there's a world. The other world is not necessarily one of sexual liberation. It may be one of degradation and evil. That I think the institutions of society are quite intentionally set up against. And I think that's something that people perhaps can understand through the process of real magical initiation, that it's like, yes, everything is an illusion. Society is an illusory construction. But the thing on the other side of that is so infinitely worse. You realize why the illusion has to be upheld.
Right. Yeah. This idea that, bridled indulgence in pleasure leads somewhere dark. It certainly does. Obviously, you think of drug addiction or even pornography as well, where a lot of people, if you read about that, a lot of people begin by looking at things that are, pretty tame, and end up over a period of months because they need more and more outrageous things to get the same sort of dopamine hit. They end up looking at some very dark kind of material that they wouldn't ever have dreamed they would be looking at. Yeah, and I think we've been talking about the dark side as this getting in touch with sexual desire or whatever. But from another perspective, the dark side is the ability to cut things off that need to be cut off, right?
Yeah.
It's not, it's the ability to defend yourself and stand your ground and say no as well.
Yeah.
And and maybe Dr. Bill was really not in touch with his dark side. It doesn't seem to be able to say no to anything, although never quite able to consummate anything at the same time. But maybe this is something he had to learn as well, to be able to fight and say no to something, or say no to these sort of dark feelings as well.
Absolutely. And I think that really is the meaning of initiation in a lot of ways. I think in all the classic stories of, an honest descent to the underworld, or any of these initiation stories from world culture where somebody goes to fairyland or goes to a, shamanic quest and comes back, they come back in the end. They never, and there's always the point made that you can't stay there, and you actually have to be extremely on guard while you're there. That, for instance, somebody doesn't give you like a pomegranate that condemns you to stay there forever, or you don't accept a gift in fairyland. Or I think there's a part in the orgy where the head of the order says something, be very careful what you say, promises made here are forever. They're binding, something like that. And so the point of the successful initiation is to come back to the status quo with a new knowledge of what is outside of that, and and then being ready to take your place in society as somebody that is upholding it. And I think that last part is very much something that is often missing from even occult narratives or initiatory narratives in actual magical systems. It's like the point is not to undermine or destroy society. It's to see what's on the other side of it and then come back and uphold it.
Yeah.
At least that's one form of, that's the classic, message throughout world history.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's right. I mean, people look at Aleister Crowley and the Golden Dawn and the Ordo Templi Orientis, but and think of them as sort of wild, sexual magicians or rule breakers. And that may have been true, but they were also people who were very upper middle class, who had a good knowledge of the Bible and of society, and were very cultured as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Golden Dawn in particular is an extremely middle class phenomenon, and Crowley very much was, although he was extremely downwardly mobile, and quite arguably did end in, or certainly went through long periods of degradation and annihilation and collapse. And I mean, Crowley is too complex to ever give any simple explanation of, but
very much so. Definitely. But even Crowley expresses I think in his autobiography or autohagiography, that the world is collapsing and we need to save the best parts of it.
Yeah, and I actually, that's one of the things he said that I really took to heart. I mean, he says in that at one point that the point of his work is to shore up, is to like build an ark of the knowledge of civilization so that it can be reassembled if it collapses. And interestingly enough, the big blue version of book 4, when you take the dust jacket off, also has the Star of Ishtar on the cover.
Oh, there you go.
And he saw it as the symbol of the Sumerian tradition, which he was at that point in his life felt he was there to resurrect, which was interesting. But yeah, I think there's that very much is the nature of initiation. And I think people who go through any type of real occult initiation, not a kind of fantasy version, will inevitably be confronted with almost unbearable evil and darkness. And that was certainly the case with in my life. And then they have to they have to see it and experience it, and then make the very conscious decision to banish it, and that doesn't mean something as glib as a banishing ritual, but
right.
The true meaning of the sword and the golden dawn. It's like, well, now so other people around you don't know, but so you better make sure that it doesn't touch them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's an interesting point, because today with everything seems to be so culturally relative, and there's no evil except whatever is the latest flavor in politics. But if you go for an initiation, you understand, some things just are evil and they're not about what's in vogue this month. It's something primordial and archetypal. That's right. And that is actually why you understand that society does need to be propped up. What's underneath it is, is far worse. And, today a lot of people think that, well, our society makes men patriarchal or whatever. But what do you think is going to happen if society collapses? It won't be people sitting around being nice to each other. We'll be murdering each other in gangs and oppressing anyone that we can.
Yeah, it'll be cartels, So
it would be cartels, exactly.
And all kinds of chaos. And that's really, this is just such a key cultural point. I mean, in Gabura in the tree is the ability to separate one thing from another. And that's the thing that, for whatever reason, so much of culture has decided is aberrant. It's like in many cases, I notice in interacting with people, particularly very, very left-wing people, that for them, the only sin is to be judgmental. And it's like, well,
yeah, that's right.
We have that for a reason, because there is, and of course, like unharnessed Gabura, unharnessed power is cruelty, right? Or sadism, and that is it's a negative aspect. But the positive aspect is the sword. It's the ability to divide that which supports life from that which does not. And without that, it's like trying to move around without a skeletal system. And that's something that needs to be grappled with again. And also, I think the understanding of evil is so important, in that we now have a kind of, as sophisticated people, we have this understanding of evil that, well, it's, socially, it's the product of socioeconomic conditions. It's the product of, structures within society. It's actually just the system has induced this in people, and actually somehow it's our fault. But no, I think particularly from the initiated perspective, or if you look at things from Eastern philosophy, for instance, like why does evil exist? Because it decides to. It's like because it wants to.
Right.
It enjoys being evil. Evil people want to be evil. They're not like victims of some framework. Right. They're choosing to be evil. And it's and that's very different from somebody who, for instance, is pushed by poverty to steal or worse. Right.
Yeah.
There's a difference between that and willful evil, which very much does exist in the world, and it seems like people have forgotten that. They just see the other political side as being evil, like you were pointing out.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's always interesting to reflect on what words have disappeared from society. And I noticed that over the last 10 years, probably, a couple of words have disappeared. One is evolution and the other is psychology. And of course, psychology has disappeared because while 10, 15, 20 years ago, everybody wanted to psychologize everybody else with their pop psychology. Now, no one wants to believe that anything could be our responsibility. And it's just that society somehow has repressed certain people. And that's why it's as if they don't actually have a mind of their own or any kind of conscious or subconscious.
Yeah, that's really, I was thinking about that a lot a couple of years ago. And it's like, if you trace back that idea, it clearly is an Enlightenment construct, or rather anti-construct.
Yeah, for sure.
The idea that, and if you look at the history of, to make a broad statement, I think if you really peel things down to their philosophical core, the actual left versus right argument is nature versus nurture. In the sense that the ultimate argument of liberalism in the true cosmic, essential sense is that it's Rousseau. It's like human beings are innately good, and if they're doing things wrong, it's because they've had evil structures placed on them, and that obviously that idea underlies so much of the current cultural discussion. And the right is, no, human beings are innately evil and sinful. And therefore, they must have structure placed on them to prevent them from causing chaos, which is there due to the condition, perhaps, of original sin, which is, as I think, the position this movie is coming from, actually. But if you look back at that historically, it's like, well, where did this wasn't ahistorical. It's like this idea that humans are innately good and must be freed of structure comes from, I would argue, the contact of Europe with the New World and Europeans seeing Native Americans and romanticizing and idealizing them, and seeing not seeing them as human beings, seeing them as this quote unquote noble savage, not recognizing that they're also human beings, projecting this idealized free self, and actually bringing back Native Americans to be ogled at by everyone in France and Europe and things like this. And that we get that book by Rousseau about this, and that underlied all these revolutions in Europe, and the idea that if they're so free, then all we need to do is throw out all of the structures that are on us, and we will return to this innocent state of nature. And there's obviously an anti-clerical and anti-Catholic thing as well, because the other thing that's being rejected there historically is the Catholic Church and the doctrine of original sin. It's like, well, if original sin exists, why are people in America who are untouched by European civilization so apparently free and happy and at one with nature? We should be like them. It's like and so you get the anti-clerical movements, and so that obviously is pretty problematic, right? Because it just idealizes other people and does not recognize their dark side or see them as human beings. It's just
that's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. And this is not a new thing, of course. Tacitus, the Roman historian, wrote about how wonderful the Germanic tribes were, even though they were savage. But partly to criticize the Roman Empire and its behavior. So it's not a new thing. But yeah, I know obviously it didn't. Europeans, when they came across Native American peoples, definitely fetishized them. Even some of the early Druid movement or thinkers were influenced by Native American tribes, and sort of wanted to emulate that with British tradition. No, and obviously, I think you find that even today, to be quite honest. But
yeah, I think so.
In regards to the nurture versus nature argument, this idea that we're innately good and it's only society that has made us bad. I mean, it has a great appeal, but I think the question that isn't really entertained there is, well, how did innately good people create a good system? And so, it seems, after a bit of thought, to not be true, right? We must have some, bad elements in us. And of course, we all know, if we've looked at our dark side, so we all have a dark side, and some people try and keep that under control, and that's what society is trying to do. And some people don't want to keep that under control because they like being, murderous or hateful or whatever it may be. But yeah.
And I think particularly one of the things I've been thinking about is, Will Durant, the historian.
Vaguely.
He's great. He's great. He and his wife wrote a whole history of the world throughout the 30s to the 50s, and amazing writer. But at the end of it, he wrote just a short book that was the lessons of history, to sum up like thousands and thousands of pages that they had written, excuse me. And one of the core lessons of history, he says, is, I forget how he puts it. It's more eloquent than this, but he says that, to become an adult, you have to at some point recognize finally that sexuality is a river of fire that must be hemmed in and dammed in 10,000 different ways, lest it destroy everything. And I think that's something that's just become more and more clear to me as I get older, to put it frankly. It's just, there's some painful lessons there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's kind of what this movie is saying, but that runs so contrary to the general, whatever you want to, the general, no pun intended, I just can't think of another word, thrust of modern discourse. Literally, I just can't think of any other way to put that. It runs so contrary to the idea of just like, well, really what's important is self-actualization, sexual liberation. And it's like, liberation into what? being somebody else's subject, subject of capital, something to be moved around like a number. It's I think that's and the other thing is, it occurred to me also recently in terms of the Enlightenment and the trajectory of that. I think the real father, you could almost argue that the real father of modern liberalism is de Sade. Because you get de Sade, which I think is quite resonant with this movie also, where you get de Sade in prison after storming the Bastille to free France from monarchy. They lock him up in prison and he spends 10 years autistically documenting every single possible sexual perversion he could imagine. Like, he's basically an architect, or he's graphing out every possible mathematical configuration. And you can see so much, it's like, look at the internet now. It's like that's the internet right there. Yeah. And also, have you seen the movie Solo that was made of that?
No, I haven't.
It's possibly the most disturbing movie ever made, but it's also the best political satire ever made. So it's a filming of 120 Days of Sodom, and you have four figures who are meant to represent the structure of society, which are, I believe, a king, a banker, a priest, and somebody else I can't remember. And they just, they lock themselves in this castle with all of these street prostitutes and kidnapped children and all of these people that no one's going to miss from the lower classes, and spend in the book, over 1,000 pages just torturing them sexually. And it's awful. It's horrible. The book is almost unreadable even by today's standards. It's so shocking. But the movie also makes the point. It's like, this is what, because Pasolini, the director, was an anarchist, and some believe he was killed shortly after the movie came out. Some suspect, like they do with Kubrick in this movie, that may have been intentional. I don't think that's the case with Kubrick. But he's basically making the point. It's like, well, this is what happens when you give people absolute power. The point that he's making is, like, people wanting power in society is a sexual fetish. They want to do it to have sexual, sadistic sexual power over other people. But the point that de Sade was making to some extent is like, okay, can we liberate humanity through the lens of sex by completely overcoming every possible filth and degradation? There's got to be some light on the other end of that tunnel. And but in de Sade's case, it's like the liberation is for the upper class, quite oddly. But that's a question that, you can see that behind so many things now. And I don't think there is a light on the other end of that tunnel.
No, that's right. I don't think so. No.
This movie, we have to, before we end, I feel like we should, particularly after mentioning de Sade, talk about all the conspiratorial stuff around this movie, because of course people have said that this was Kubrick trying to say something or reveal the Illuminati, and the fact that he died 6 days after it was completed shows that he was killed for it, which is pretty silly, because if that was the case, why did they even let him make it in the first place?
Or release it.
But there's this exactly. But there's this kind of miasma of conspiratorial thinking around this movie, and I wonder if you've ever come across that or had thoughts on that.
I have definitely come across this idea that, obviously some people say it's about Freemasonry. Those people don't really know what Freemasonry is. Probably ignore that because it's certainly not about Freemasonry. And then other people are saying, it's this weird, in the very upper echelons of power, which and I don't think there are I don't know, because I don't have any contact with these people, but I would be surprised if there were sort of organized sex cults. I wouldn't be. Well,
we had Jeffrey Epstein.
Some of them are.
That actually happened.
Yeah, no, exactly, and that's clearly, and clearly there are people in power who are sexually perverse, or will have sex with underage girls or whatever. And Jeffrey Epstein was clearly keen to entrap those people and probably get whatever could out of them for whichever government agency or whatever. So these things go on, and I'm sure that there's a certain number of people in power who are perverts, or who can be enticed into doing things that are pretty abnormal, which is unfortunate. But I don't know about, organized. Well, I guess even Jeffrey Epstein, there's some indication there might be some sort of ritual thing that went on, but I don't. Who knows exactly what that was? But yeah,
I think he had there was that temple on an island that was oddly also, I think, Mesopotamian.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I guess, the thing we should say is that, while there are undoubtedly these weirdos and perverts in power, some of them, not all of them, of course, and maybe, I don't know, maybe they are having strange rituals before they have weird sex, but, I think maybe it gets a little bit bizarre when people try and link it to sort of age-old societies and say this is some direct lineage from the Illuminati of 300 years ago. People in power, I think, in any society take advantage of that to get the best includes, and that includes as much and as different sex as they can get. Certainly, the elite in North Korea always have expensive whiskey, even though, the people they preside over are all starving. And same in the USSR, they could have whatever they wanted, even though they were all no more equal than everybody else who were sent to the gulags or starving, allegedly. But they all managed to enrich themselves somehow. So I think it's human nature that if you have power and you have more power than everybody else, you're going to use it to exploit other people. I think this is one of the well-meaning people don't realize today. They think if we can just get nice people in power, then they will be able to sort of parentally guide us and we'll be fine. It's like, well, those people who want to be in power are all psychopaths, so they're going to just exploit you as much as, if not more than everybody else. So, even with the Jeffrey Epstein, it wasn't as if it was just, I don't think it was just limited to one party.
No, definitely not.
And, there was certainly plenty of people. Yeah, and there were certainly plenty of people involved in it who, in public eye, are applauded for being, champion equality and women's rights and this kind of thing, but are at least associated with a figure who exploits, underage girls for sex. They haven't apologized for being associated with him, so
yeah,
I'm sure they knew what was going on.
Well, like Bill Gates became friends with him after all of the allegations had come out and said, yes, his lifestyle is very fascinating.
That's right. Yeah, I saw a brief interview of him talking about it where he seemed to be very nervous, saying he didn't really have anything to do with him or had dinner with him once while looking very twitchy and...
Yeah. It was pretty funny recently. I saw Bill Gates did an AMA on Reddit and it clearly expected everyone to receive him as the great technological savior of the third world. Right. And people just raked him over the coals. Like every single comment was like, wow. Like how many underage girls were there at on the plane to Jeffrey Epstein's island? It's like every single comment was that. And so, and he had to see all of them. I thought that was pretty hilarious, actually. There's also the aspect of this where it's not necessarily literal at all, but it's true in the sense of emotional resonance or people's internal states, because sexual cruelty is obviously part of the training of, ruling elites in society. And the obvious example is the British upper class, right? In the public school system and being abused by older boys. And you probably remember the story about David Cameron and the pig.
Right. Yeah. Yes, I do.
Yeah. And it's just like, it seems to be something about, there is a ritualistic training aspect of that where they're just trying to break the humanity out of young men who are expected to maintain an inherently inhuman system.
Yeah.
And that also occurs, I think, in a lot of structures in society. I was thinking recently just how much that happens in society as well. And again, forgive me, but assessing my own white privilege, going back and thinking about all like the really nasty things that have happened to me in my career and really harsh things, and thinking like, well, given who I am, it's like, was that really trying to hurt me, or was that people trying to toughen me up so that I could do the same to other people later? And that was a really disturbing thought. It's like, was this actually malicious, or was it, trying to callous me to lead in the future? And that was a pretty disturbing thought.
I'm sure, but I think you're probably onto something there.
Yeah. So, and there just is, it is part of the nature of, society is this vast machine that is constantly in the business of replicating it and preserving its function. And I think that's just the all conspiracies aside, that's the true important message of this movie. I can't think of many other artworks that have the same message. Ironically, I assume you're not into video games, but
no.
Yeah, I am.
I'm not against them, but I'm not.
Yeah. The first Last of Us game, for anyone who's listening to this who played that, very much has the same message. And it's just this sobering message of being an adult does not mean getting your way. It does not mean being happy. It does not mean being the good guy. It does not mean pursuing the truth. It just means maintaining it consists of maintaining a safe and nourishing life for other people that is for their best, and bearing the knowledge that it's not actually real, bearing the knowledge of the dark side, your own dark side, but just protecting people from that, because how could you if you hadn't experienced it yourself?
Right, exactly, yeah.
And that's, I think, a true initiation in adulthood. One final conspiracy theory I wanted to point out is I actually couldn't find anything about this on the internet. I didn't look too hard, but I remember hearing at one point, part of the context of this movie is that I think is really important, is that this was filmed during the very brief period that Tom Cruise was out of Scientology, because he had married Nicole Kidman, whose father is a therapist in London, and this movie was filmed in England, and they had successfully managed to extricate him from Scientology and begin rehabilitating him. Wow. And some have speculated that the Eyes Wide Shut has the longest filming of any movie in the Guinness Book of World Records. They spent like 400 days filming this movie, and some have speculated that may have been related, perhaps, of trying to keep him over there. And other people have speculated that part of this movie is Tom Cruise in a certain way trying to tell people about what's going on in Scientology. But very sadly, shortly after this, the Scientologists purposefully broke up that marriage, got Tom Cruise back to the U.S., got him married to Katie Holmes, and this was the beginning of the downfall of Tom Cruise. This was when he was jumping on the couch on Oprah and losing his mind publicly, and was then rejected as a crazy cult member by the public until rehabilitating himself with Top Gun 2, which perhaps we should return and end on, because, everything relates to Top Gun. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or if you've come across that theory.
Yeah, I haven't really, and I don't really know that much about Scientology, though it's not something I would ever want to explore.
That's probably for the best.
Yeah.
The real dark side. All right, well, what do you think? What should we end this on? Or do you have any final thoughts on the movie?
No, only that I think one of the main subtexts is that it really is this sort of paganism returning through this sort of monotheism, and immorality returning through this veneer of morality, and of thinking that we are good people, where to us underneath that's always trying to come through.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that was a good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Where can people find out more about you, your books, and what is your latest book? What should people be looking for?
Oh, yeah, it's The Path of the Warrior Mystic, Being a Man in an Age of Chaos.
And people can, of course, go back and listen to the podcast we did about that one for more on that, too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, definitely. And my book can be found on Barnes & Noble and Amazon and all those places. And my website is angelmillar.com, ANGELMILLAR.com.
Awesome. Any new projects coming up in the works?
I'm working on a book on self-hypnosis, and a little bit more than that, but self-development and self-hypnosis. So yeah, that'll probably be the next one.
Excellent. I will keep an eye out for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Hope you really enjoyed that. That was a great conversation with Angel. Mastering Meditation is waiting for you at magick.me, magick.me, along with tons of other courses, but that's the newest one. Go check it out. It is the greatest course on the planet for learning and mastering the core fundamentals of true meditation, mindfulness, and yoga. Magick.me, magick.me, Mastering Meditation. Lots of love. I will see you in class and see you very soon.